Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of some books that I personally may have wanted to be a little longer. Even if you haven't read these books, it's completely fine. I'm not going to be giving away any spoilers. And also, I think it's kind of interesting that when you hear, oh, okay, that book, maybe they would have liked it to be a little longer, you might assume it's because the story was really short, but that's not true for a couple of these, including the first one, which would be literally the biggest book I have ever read, Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. So I do want to clarify, this is the third book in a series that is projected to be 10 books long, broken up into two 5-part arcs. So obviously the story's not done, but there's a difference, I think, in wanting more. You're left with wanting more of the general story, and you're left with wishing certain scenes had been longer or had been executed differently. And that is what I mean when I say I wish this had been longer, because there are certain moments in this story that I was so looking forward to. There were certain scenes that I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see how the characters are going to react to this, or I can't wait to see how these characters are going to behave when they find this certain thing out, those sorts of things. And then we would get those scenes, and sometimes they were really brief or they were completely glossed over, and I was like, wait, that's it? There was a certain moment in this book where it felt both too long and too short at the same time. This particular thing in this book that happened, if we had spent more time with this particular thing, then it would have felt more organic to the story. But because we didn't spend more time there, it weirdly felt like it sort of didn't have a huge purpose within this particular book. It just felt like it had to be there for later books, which weirdly, by being a shorter length, made it feel too long. I don't think that makes sense. It makes sense in my brain, but saying it out loud doesn't sound like it makes sense. If you've read the book and you know what I'm talking about, let me know, because right now I just feel like a dum-dum. The next book on the list would be Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. This is the first book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, and it's really always really entertaining to me because a lot of really big fans of this series will say Gardens of the Moon is the weakest book. It is not the best representation of the series. Please keep reading. It's the only one I've read of the series so far. I can definitely see that it is leading and building into something bigger. I have no idea if I will end up loving that bigger thing or not, but I think a lot of the elements of this first book that made it just what it is, it's just kind of a building foundation for the rest of the series. Particular taste, it was like I got an ingredient to something as opposed to, okay, that analogy is probably really dumb. Let me see if I can clear it up. Okay, so if I'm going to make something, if I'm going to bake something, and you have all these different ingredients, it's like they're all set up in their different spots. Like you have them all laid out and you see all the ingredients, and that's it. You have no idea what the final product will look like, what it'll taste like, because you just have all these separate things, and you really don't get to see them come together and become something great in this first book. You see a glimpse of it. You see a hint of it. And I just think that if we had gotten more, we could have developed the characters more, we could have built more of a connection to them, we could have built more of a connection to the world. Next up, we have a story that I personally didn't find the book itself should have been longer. I just think I would have liked if it had been a series. That would be an Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. So Margaret Rogerson, in this particular story, it's about a girl who is a painter. She's human, and she ends up doing paintings for Fae because they can't do paintings themselves. It's this weird magical restriction, basically. And so she paints these portraits for them, and she ends up doing something in one of her portraits that jeopardizes the reputation of a very important Fae. And so she kind of gets swept along into the Fae world, and it's a little bit of a love story, and the world is very beautiful and lush. Margaret Rogerson has a stunning writing style that I absolutely loved in this story. I thought the characterizations were very cute, and it was a lovely little tale. It's a standalone, so it's just the one book, and I think it's very refreshing every now and then to pick up a book and just read one, and it's one and done. You get through it and you're like, that was a nice story. But Margaret Rogerson, I almost feel like she did too good of a job making me like this world and talking about how pretty it was and the court politics and all that stuff, because you really don't get to get into that stuff very much. I wanted to get into it because she made it seem so appealing. As is common in a lot of fae stories, you have the different courts, and those courts are kind of in this perpetual state of a certain season. So you have the summer court, the fall court, the winter court, whatever. And there's a lot of lore within the courts. And because she's a human, our main character goes there and she sees glimpses of it, but she doesn't see the whole picture. And I wanted the whole picture. Maybe not the whole picture, but I wanted more of it. Because gosh darn it, she did such a good job. I know fae are kind of a trope now at this point because a lot of people have written about fae, but I just feel Margaret Rogerson, she wrote fae in a way, sorry for the rhyming, she wrote them in a way that I was so compelled by, and it made me want to know more about actual lore that they're based around. I really, maybe I just wanted to write a series. It doesn't even have to be about the characters in this book because I think their story is done, but I guess I wanted to write a whole series set in some kind of fairy tale-like world because, gosh darn it, she's only given us standalones so far, and I would be very interested in a series by her. Along those same lines would be The Girl the Sea Gave Back. This is a story by an author who wrote it as a companion novel to Sky in the Deep. It's a Viking-esque story, and the writing was very beautiful. It was very atmospheric, and the setup is that you have these two characters who are from these different clans, and the clans are somewhat warring. And there was so much with the politics and the history of these clans and why they have so much tension between them. And I eat that kind of stuff up. But we really only got some of that information. We got enough of that information for our main characters to kind of get swept along in it. But we really didn't dive into it the way I perhaps would have wanted. I just want this author, the same way I want Margaret Rogerson to write a whole series that is based in some kind of fairy tale world. I want this particular author to write a whole series that's based in some kind of a Viking world because I think she could do a really fantastic job. Last on this list would be Monsters of Verity. The first book is The Savage Song by V.E. Schwab. So this duology, both the books are fairly short, but they take place within such an interesting premise. So the idea is that bad acts end up turning into monsters, and the kind of act that is committed that is really terrible creates a different kind of monster. And so we have two different characters. One character is a human and one character is a monster, but they look like a human. And so they kind of get by pretending to be a human, and these two individuals end up meeting and becoming friends, despite the fact they're very different and the world is very dark. And it's our own world, essentially, but it's, you know, obviously changed based off of the fact there's monsters everywhere now. The world was so interesting, and I feel like V.E. Schwab could have just extended this and made it so much longer. Not that she should have, because I found the ending to be quite satisfying. I just found that V.E. Schwab is like the queen of having really interesting premises that I just want to explore more of, but she gives you a trilogy or she gives you a duology, and I'm like, gosh darn it, woman, give me a whole series. You could argue, of course, that a duology and trilogies, things like that, are series. I'm not saying they're not. I just mean I want like 5 or more books in a set world just with her interest, all her interesting ideas. I just want to get more into them because we get in her worlds, and I think it's kind of cool actually. It's kind of a double-edged sword. We get something very interesting, but there's still a sense of wonder because she doesn't just give it all to you. And sometimes I just want her to give me a little more, you know, because she's got such interesting ideas. They're super yummy and I want to eat them up more, but she's only giving me a taste. Anyway, that's it for some books that I enjoy, but there are certain elements of the books that I wish we had gotten more of, or I just wish that we could have a whole series with these particular worlds, things like that. Let me know if you felt similarly about these particular books I mentioned, or if there are other books that you would have liked to have lasted longer. As always though, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.